Warning: the podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast. Goodbye Season 6 and hello Season 7 for 2023. I am Wendy.
And I'm David.
Well, David, why don't you tell us what we can expect from this recap of Season 6?
Well, I think we'll just do Season 6 in 2022. First of all, I wanted to thank all the listeners out there that started listening and told their friends, because our audience keeps growing.
It does.
It's very impressive. And it's all over the world, which is kind of bizarre to think about all the different countries that people are tuning in and listening to. So thank you to the listeners out there for sure. We'll talk about Season 6 in 2022 as a whole. A lot of big things happened in 2022, and 2023 has got big things coming as well. For example, let's start with Season 6.
All right.
Because there was a lot of good material in there. If you looked at Season 6 itself, of the episodes that we produced, which one or ones spoke to you and why?
Well, definitely, my pick's going to be Angie. The episodes we did on the murder of my best friend, Angela Owens Woldridge. If you haven't listened, she was murdered in February of this year by her husband, and who then committed suicide. So I think I would have to take that as my pick because it was totally unscripted. Not that any of our stuff is scripted, but we know what we're going to talk about. And that one was just kind of off the cuff. You threw some questions at me I wasn't ready for, but I'd say that's probably my top.
I'll be honest with you, some other ones spoke to me for some different reasons, but that one spoke to me very solidly because of the fact that I knew her too.
Right.
And I think the audience got to see and hear you in a way that they hadn't heard you before, with a lot of vulnerability based on the fact that
yes.
that hurt. And then plus it was an awareness piece. So I think we did two things: is we honored Angie, and it'll be less likely that she just disappears into the universe somewhere and isn't known anymore. We've got her memorialized on the internet forever that way now, and to talk about the wonderful person she was. But it also served as a message on domestic violence.
Yeah, it did, because, I think I'd said in that piece that we did, you hear of domestic violence and it's horrible. And ironically, a lady had just been murdered the week before Angie, and it happens so much more than we realize. And I think people think, well, it's just something you see on the headlines. It's certainly not going to happen to your best friend. And it really opened my eyes that when somebody, you kind of know they're going through it, but you never think it's going to end in that. And so I think that was the most eye-opening experience for me in realizing just how dangerous domestic violence is.
And I think one of the messages that people got, and some of the audience responded on this, is the community of the idea that if you've got friends that are going through this, is to open up a support network for them, to help them with planning, to help them to stay alert, because a lot of people that are in those situations are blind to it. And so, again, the episodes, I don't think, are some kind of a big magic fix to domestic violence. That'd be ridiculous. But I think listeners got to hear more of the indicators that could be in existence if you're with somebody that is dangerous.
Yes, or at least bringing awareness to your friend that you know. And she may say, no, it's not like that. And that wasn't the case with Angie. But I think a lot of people going through that, there's a little bit of embarrassment that comes with it. And you don't want to admit that that's going on in your home. But still, yeah, I hope that it did get awareness out to somebody, that be aware of what your friend may be going through. Your gut's never wrong. And as soon as I met her husband, I told you from day one, I didn't like him. I didn't trust him. I had bad feelings about him. And ultimately, I was right. That gut wasn't wrong. The other thing I might want to add, you asked about what else stood out to me for our Season 6. Ironically, the other thing that stood out to me was the unsolved murder of David Kelm, which, strangely enough, was Angie's first husband. So we had that circle, and you and I often talk, David, how so many times murders are connected but they're not directly connected. Like somebody always knows somebody, and it brings it full circle. And in this case, on David Kelm, Angie's first husband, he was murdered. That is an unsolved. And we were hoping to reach out to someone who may know something, even a small detail about David's murder. We had David's sister here, David's mother here, and a close family friend. So it was really just bizarre after I had come close with Rachel and Jessica, again, after many years of being away from them, on Angie's death, only to have them sitting here recouping their son's death
That
and brother's
that spoke to me
death.
too, and that's one of the things we'll hint about what's coming more is that we had told everybody we were going to do some unsolves in 2022, and we're going to move even forward in 2023, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But again, there we are. One of our goals is to uplift that victim to get some recognition of the fact of who they were, and that case shouldn't be forgotten. That's a big deal in this. And if it moves the ball forward, that would be even better.
Yes.
That would be the whole
Well,
thing.
that family deserves answers, and David deserves justice.
And that's true with every
Yes.
wrongful death. Speaking of those, I was going to tell you that I don't have any favorites in our episodes because they all mean so much. But I will say this is that, we started out with me covering the murder of Keisha Hughes, which was another domestic violence death in Louisville that I handled. But you'd have to admit that when we did the 4 pieces on the murder of Aubrey Knuckles, that a horrific case, a true kidnap for ransom case, which is extremely rare. But tell me if I'm wrong, was it not an amazing thing to be in the room with Billy Richmond and Paul Williams for, I think, 3 hours, maybe 4 hours?
That and I want our listeners to know we do not make light of anyone's death. We take that very seriously. But that episode, I wish that we had that on video because it was a hoot, and not any disrespect to Mr. Knuckles' family, but just because you had worked for so many years with Billy and Paul, and having Billy and Paul together in the same room with you, it was. And most of the time, the joking wasn't even about Mr. Knuckles. It was goofy stuff that you all would rib each other on in the detective bureau.
Yeah, just to be clear, there was no jokes about the victim.
No, absolutely none about Mr. Knuckles.
What I think you were seeing, and I think people will understand, is that I've said it before, that as far as team experiences in a 28-year career, nothing matched being with those people in the robbery homicide unit. And what you saw was there's a sense of humor that develops in there that's part of your resiliency plan that helps you get through the worst of the worst. And that ends up being the people that you love in that team. You're brutal with them.
Yeah, and I think the camaraderie there
is amazing.
It just was amazing, and you could tell that everybody worked so well with each other. And in many careers, as I'm sure most people know, having that bond with your coworkers is tough. And and I see it firsthand in what I do. And you're there for a common reason, and in this case, it's for victims. But just the way that they work off of each other, work well together, that was just really amazing. And then there was the humor aspect. Billy, several times, or maybe it was Paul, when one of them would answer, it was instead of saying yes sir, he would say yes ma'am, and it was just a night of fun recording.
I've thought about, maybe somebody suggested about a year ago to do an outtake episode or two, and I might try to do that with Glenn with the things that I can do.
I don't even know if that would be legal.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, again, what you're seeing is really big camaraderie, and inside of that is there's a humor that if you can't carry that with a group of people in that kind of work, I think it would eat your life. So the murder of Aubrey Knuckles, I think, took the audience down a road of what it's like to get that missing case that is a missing case, because we talked about that before with Detective David Hester, about the complexity of doing missing persons investigations. Yes. And that because most people that are missing are not the victims of foul play. And then when you get one that is real, that spoke. So season 6 really, that one spoke to me during season 6. Was there anything else during the year that spoke to you that we did? Any other episode?
You know, still my all-time favorite, and I don't know if it was this year or last year because you know they one thing you always said, and it is true. You always say, well, they all run together. And when I'm asking you about different homicides, oh, they all run together. And I'm thinking, how do they run together? They should stand out. But when you think about them, they truly do all run together. But still, I will say hands down, and Angie's wasn't my favorite because I would give anything to not cover my best friend's murder. But my all favorite that we have done is Haley McCone.
Yeah, there was
And
2021. Yeah,
and
I do know that.
I didn't know when it was,
Yeah,
but I
it
knew
wasn't last year.
But
Yeah.
you know, if the listeners haven't heard that, and I don't know why that has always been my favorite, because it's a horrible case of a 13-year-old little girl that was murdered by a serial killer. But I think, and maybe because when you and I met, that we talked about that, you took me to the site where she was found. And so I knew some of the ins and outs, well, a lot of the ins and outs, and I had read the book about him and watched some YouTube videos on him. So I think just that connection of it all and being at her death site, in just the details, there were so many little details in that of her bike and other people when he took off from here, that the two other little girls that he tried to kill, that brought it full circle. I just think that's my favorite.
Yeah, it was an interesting case for sure.
What about yours?
Boy, well, I'm just going to stick probably with 2022 right now, because I have a hard time with a
Okay.
favorite. I will say this: so far, the one that spoke the most emotion was Angie's, and we know
Emotionally,
yeah,
yes.
for sure, and it meant a lot to do that. But I will say we're going to talk about 2023, and there's some really special things that are in the bucket right now, and I'm pretty sure they're going to go. If anybody's ever done this before, when you're not just storytelling, you're reaching out to families and things. And I do have some things that are going to be very special and very close to me that are they're in the works, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Before we go to what's coming in 2023, and there's a lot of neat things, this video might be a hint as to where we want to go to, is I do want to take a minute and talk about some of our podcast picks. Some of the people are local and some of them aren't, but on our website at murderpolicepodcast.com, you can go and see what we're listening to. Now, this one, I'm going to name a few, and it's not everything I listen to. I listen to more podcasts than you do, I think.
Right, you do. I'm
And-
usually on the phone
Exactly.
for my commute.
That's it. And but I did want to give a shout out to a few just real quick. And if people get a minute, they can listen. And they're in no particular order, but I want to start with speaking of Harvey. And we know Harvey.
Great guy. Scott Harvey, he was an officer for a while, quite a while, years. He retired. And he has written a book and he does a podcast. You do a leadership mastermind class with him.
Scott Harvey did we finally got the
Yes,
episode
he interviewed
0.
us of Who Are We?
And we finally got that done. We should have done that day one before
Should have done
anything
that
dropped.
day one.
But he did such a good job with his hostile takeover.
He did, and he's just a really great guy.
There it is.
You know, Scott's just a genuine guy.
But if people tune in to speaking of Harvey, he really is really big on entrepreneurship, on developing businesses, developing yourself personally. A very genuine guy. And again, I do want to say this, that he has a book that's been published. It'll be officially available in April called Silence Kills. And he takes his knowledge as a former hostage negotiator and applies that to the importance of communication. I've read it cover to cover. I recommend it when I teach for FBI Leader to my students now all over the country. It is about the best book I've seen on communication, period, in plain speak to describe that. So take a listen to Speaking of Harvey. Another one, a common friend of ours, and we just saw him at a festival, and his friend Harold do a wonderful podcast called the Uncommon History of the South podcast. And you know me, and again, I think you just don't listen to him but that is on my hot list like the rest of them.
It is, and let's tell Brian is a former officer.
Right, exactly.
And he's now a jailer.
He's the jailer in Boyle County, Kentucky.
So he has experience in law enforcement. But yeah, he really is a history buff.
Oh, yeah, and him and his friend Harold, the co-host.
Yes.
For me, especially the local regional history is amazing. And in 2023, we hope to have him on. I spoke to him. We saw him at the Perryville Battlefield Festival not too long ago, and offered him a chance because I want people to hear what it's like if you're a jailer and you're operating a jail. Let's talk a little bit about when somebody's charged with murder and they're in jail, which isn't prison yet. and we'll go deeper in that. And Brian's agreed to come on and talk about that. And I'll add one more thing. Brian does so much with people that are in custody as far as trying to make reentry easier and have them not repeat offend. He's got some wonderful things.
Yeah,
so.
he truly is passionate about what he does. He's not just a jailer, in my opinion, that just houses them until it's time to move on to the next step. He really tries to mold them into, any trades that they can do, teaching them to get back into the workforce. So he's very passionate about what he
right.
does.
And I've said before that the police will put you in jail, but really we don't like repeat business. We hope that people find things to move them on after that. The next one, some friends of ours, and we've had them here in this studio before, and I think we're going to invite them back on a particular project that I've got planned, is Erica and Jonathan with the Lexington podcast, which hands down, go listen to that. I think that I tuned in, found them a little over a year ago, and they covered the Bluegrass Conspiracy so thoroughly. And I'm not going to tell people what that is. I want you to go to the Lexington podcast and start with the Bluegrass Conspiracy episodes, because Erica and her brother Jonathan will fill you in better. Wonderful people. They came in with they co-interviewed with one of the cases we had.
Yeah, and let me just add, she is probably the biggest fan of Fran.
Fran Root.
Fran Root has been on several times. I think when you were under Fran, he was
probably a major.
He was a major, and Fran's just a wonderful guy. You can't not love Fran.
As a matter of fact, I'll just say this, and I don't think Erica will mind, but she refers to herself as a Fran addict, and so she got to meet him and look at some of his trial prep books from back in the day, which was kind of neat. It was a little bit of piece of history. So definitely you need to look into the Lexington podcast. Another one, and you've met a mutual guy that's here in Lexington, is the 13th Floor podcast with James. And James,
and I still call him Leo because that's how he introduced himself. He's just a neat guy.
Yeah, and he's with an organization here called the Lexington Podcasters, and it's a Facebook group and whatever. A very genuine guy, very smart guy. And on the 13th Floor, him and his two friends who are now in Georgia, what they do is they pick topics every week, and they do some light research, and then they talk about them. And there's very few talking podcasts that I enjoy. This one, I take in whatever they have when it drops, because it's entertaining. They can carry conversation in a very wonderful way, and hell, you learn something when you listen. I mean,
I have to say, you're probably going to shoot me after this, but I remember when the first time we met him and you went to find his podcast and you were listening, and I can only say this now because I do this, but you said that you didn't realize you listened to the wrong one, and you said they were talking about riding their Peloton, and Leo told you, that is not mine. I don't ride Peloton.
I'll confess there is more than one.
Yes, I said that because I wanted you to clarify so they could listen to the correct 13th Floor.
Exactly. Good point. And I felt awful about that, but he was very polite and put in. So the one I'm talking about has James York, and I'm trying to think real quick, and it'll come to me about the names of his partners just briefly escape me. I'll come back to it in a minute. But
well, I have to say, you got me a Peloton. Plus.
Yeah, it's true.
For Christmas. And so whoever those people were that rode Pelotons, I totally want to follow them now because, I'm into my Peloton every night.
That's true, because then you can say you did that.
I did that.
You did that Peloton. Well, the next one, too, is Taking Alex, is a podcast. It's a serial podcast.
Yes.
It's one case of the murder of the abduction and murder of Alex Johnson.
And we covered that.
Yeah, we did, too. And we covered that by the perspective of speaking to the detectives. But Kristen Flum, who is who had been a local anchor and reporter here, did just a knockout job.
Oh, she did a wonderful job.
Won an award for this series of podcasts because of the depth that she took it to. And so go download the entire series of Taking Alex, listen to Kristen. Kristen, by the way, is one of a handful of reporters from that industry that the police here actually trust. And I mean that in a way that they will talk to Kristen more, because there's other parts of the media that gets kind of spooky sometimes for people doing investigations. I'll leave that at that. The next one is Dr. Greg Davis on medicine. And that was based on us actually going to the University of Kentucky to where he teaches the forensic pathology. And we sat down in a conference room outside the lab, and that meant a lot because Greg was a medical examiner back when I was in the unit, and he's an educator.
He's just a neat guy.
He's a neat guy.
He's so smart.
You cannot be in a room with him and not learn. So I recommend people listen to Dr. Greg Davis on medicine, subscribe to him, because whenever he drops episodes, he's talking about current things. He was real big on the entire gamut of COVID, for example, but he speaks with physicians and practitioners all over the world about these topics. And here's one that we've got to talk about, and I've got to get a shout out.
What is it?
One Movie Guy's Opinion with Chuck Ginter.
Chuck is awesome, and his wife, sorry, Chuck, I'm not going to say awesomer, but Shelley's pretty awesome too.
She's pretty awesome too.
She doesn't do the show with him, but it's one of these things that brings it full circle. Chuck used to be Jasper's baseball coach. My son, when he was doing baseball, he's a big lacrosse guy now. Jasper, not Chuck. But we met Chuck through his, because he was Jasper's coach. And he's just a neat guy. And Shelley's just, well, I just love Shelley.
Well, and I'll tell you what, I remember when he was talking about, he was excited about the concept of starting a podcast, and I met him one day. We met
him for dinner.
And I was like, go, go, go. And he's done it. And what it is that it's Chuck, and I think occasionally he has guests. As a matter of fact, he wants us to come do one, which I'm down for anytime. But they just simply look at movies and throw their opinion out. So again, it's one of those, he's successful at the conversation type podcast. And just One Movie Guy's Opinion with Chuck Ginter. Go get it, download it, subscribe to him, and support his podcast.
He's just a super cool guy.
Yeah, you're right. I love those.
Yeah, they're just great.
Love them. And last but not least is Morbidology, which I probably listen to a lot more than you do. Morbidology is from Emily in Ireland. And the thing I like about Morbidology is her attention to detail when she researches before she tells the story is incredible. And she leaves no stone unturned. So I always recommend that to friends is definitely take a look at that. Just the detail alone reminds me of what we do, except we take that perspective in from the investigator. So Morbidology is a beautiful podcast. And then just of recently, I have to throw another one in, and that's the season 2 of the Culpable podcast, which was new to me until just recently. But Jessica No, who worked with the Bardstown podcast, another one.
Which is another really good podcast.
Let's add that to the list.
That's
Bardstown, for sure.
That was one of my favorites.
Yeah. She's a fantastic journalist. And in this season 2, they're covering the 2013 murder of a young woman named Brittany Stykes. I'm sorry, I almost said Skies. Brittany Stykes in rural Brown County, Ohio, where she was murdered. Her small child had received a head wound from a bullet, and Brittany was pregnant at the time of the murder. And that has not been solved. And it's got that whole little town wrapped up. And in listening to it, I love the way they cover it in Culpable. Is the old detective in me, when I'm driving around, I would do this, not questioning them, but I've come to respect the investigators in that case and the journalists doing it. So take a listen to that. So, and
I did want to add one thing that I should have said when we were talking about my favorites. In covering Angie's, her death brought me very close with the Jessamine County coroner.
Exactly.
And we had them on. We did an episode with them on what it's like to be a coroner. And I'm going to be willing to bet that most people are unaware of all that the coroner does. You were even scratching your head.
There's a couple of things.
It's some of the things that they do.
I think that's the whole purpose of the podcast, and I think we've been successful according to our audience, is that we're giving details that are just assumed or guessed at. And the difference between a coroner and a medical examiner, and when a coroner is elected. And
well, and the laws, I didn't realize that they have the power to arrest.
Yeah, exactly.
And certain things as well that they told us about cremation. There's laws on that. I was so unaware of a lot, but that spoke to me as well, not just because of what Michael Hughes and his team does, but they were just really there for me during Angie's death, and the way that they just reached out. and I don't know, maybe other coroners do it as well, but I'd be willing to bet they don't. They called me and checked on me, and every time I called, no matter the hour, that phone was answered by
But
those
that's one
people.
of I think what we extracted from that is servant leadership. And
Yes.
they've nailed it. And Cassie Robinson, the deputy coroner,
Cassie was just
amazing.
and she and I went, and it's if our listeners look at our Facebook, David had posted, Cassie and I went to the lady that was actually murdered the week before Angie in our town. They had an event one night, and Cassie and I went to it to speak on domestic violence, and Cassie on how she covered that lady's death as well. But Cassie's just such a wonderful person, and she truly cares about the people that she serves. I could sit for hours on the phone with her, and she's just a very neat lady, and she's so passionate about what she does, and it really shows.
It does.
So that was a favorite of mine as well.
Yeah,
was
people
that
need to go back and
podcast.
listen to that one with the Jessamine County Coroner Michael Hughes.
Yeah, that was
and
really
get
very
the role.
neat.
Well, there were some other things that happened this year as we move forward too. Real quick is that we, after some work with our focus group, which we were grateful for, we call them the squad, is that we settled in on a charitable foundation that we want to tithe to. And we wanted one that was victim focused, victim centered, that had a broad reach. And we came across the DNA Doe Project. And as we just did an episode with Karen Binder, who's one of their staff people there. And just real quick, they focus solely on identifying unidentified human remains and bring answers to people, whether or not it's a criminal case or not, which I think is beautiful. And their success rate is incredible, but they need money because they're a nonprofit.
Right.
So we definitely donate 10% of any of our merch or swag sales will go to DNA Doe. And then plus, I was so intrigued. And I'm not saying this to brag, but we just sent them a check for $500 for this year. And I have a recurring donation of $50 a month because Meta, Facebook, was doing matching over the holidays. So this is dated, I guess, but we're in December of 2022. Facebook or Meta is matching donations up to $100 for DNA Doe Project, and you can find a link at murderpolicepodcast.com or just search DNA Doe Project and learn about that organization. So back to 2023. I guess we can move on and talk about what we're looking at. I know we took a little bit of a break here in December. I'm producing content, but it doesn't mean we're not busy putting content together. The big thing I think that we're going to shoot for is we've got the merch store open. We hope people go there. One, you should have the Murder Police Podcast content in your swag collection, but you're also helping DNA Doe Project with that. Moving on is I think that we're really going to work on trying to go more into YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. Mainly, I've got some listeners that use that as a player, but this video is the proof of where we want to go. Is that we actually want to start videotaping our podcast episodes, and then possibly even moving into some live stream events. So
it holds some of us accountable who can tend to have foul mouths.
That's true. One of the things I did, I had to sit down with Wendy and give her the warning. So it because there's not enough parental advice to handle her when she gets
But after
going.
you edit it, I sound really good.
Oh, you do? Yeah, exactly.
Not one foul word. And I've
Yeah.
done well tonight.
Yeah, so far
I
so
really
good.
have done well.
So good. Yeah,
So this is my tool of accountability.
That's
I
think, and you need that in your life.
I do.
I think you do.
I
So,
do.
but that's one of the plans is to move into that. We've done some research on equipment and we're putting things together is to give more of that response. And it'll be interesting for the listeners because they'll get to put the faces with the names. And let's be candid. We're in Kentucky, and I don't know.
We have teeth and shoes, though.
We do. Yeah, it bought and paid for. But but you know, one thing, I think some people, if they were listening carefully, they may occasionally hear glass and an ice here in the studio at murderpolicepodcast.com.
You throwing things again?
No, bourbon. And
I
because
don't drink
we have
bourbon.
the green room. I know you don't.
I do not like
I've always said that because you don't. My bourbon collection is safe until my 15-year-old stepson learns how to water it down like me and my brothers did my dad's. Thank you, Tim, in California. Anyway, what we're going to do is you'll probably, we might even throw a little conversation on Kentucky bourbon, which is a fantastic topic.
I won't participate in that.
And you can talk about $8 wine. I mean, it's fair.
Hey,
It's
my
really
wine,
fair.
the Moscato's more than $8. It's
Yeah.
$15.99.
There we
But
go.
hey,
I
be
forgot.
grateful it doesn't cost you much.
That's true. Exactly. Yeah. I pay you. in other ways.
You do.
Yeah.
It's worth it.
But anyway, that's one thing we're looking at. So it won't mean longer episodes. We'll break those up and everything, but I think we'll get a lot more detail that people will be interested in, put names with
I just want to
faces.
bring our miniature horses on for an episode.
We will. We'll
Might
do
mean
something.
recording outside, but we have 4 miniature horses,
We'll include them somehow.
and I think they need to be included.
We'll do an outside
At least the
day.
cat.
Yeah, at least the cat for sure. Figaro, the fierce cat there. So I guess what we're looking at too is some of the content. I don't want to promise too much in case the content doesn't come through, but here's some of the things we're looking at. We promised when we talked to Paul and Billy that we're looking at Suzanne Stoffels, which was a fascinating case. We're trying to get that together, to get the materials together. I will tell the listeners, go and Google a thing called One Neat Aspect, and that'll prepare you for something that you'll see. One Neat Aspect. I won't share that today, but that's a murder cop kind of thing that we learn after a while. We've got that. I believe that I think at some point too we're going to be talking to some prosecutors and defense attorneys, and to get that perspective. For example, what it's like to prosecute cases, what it's like to get a not guilty when you're sure that you had the case you liked, and on the other side of the fence is talk to some really good criminal defense attorneys, and Lexington has many, that to talk about what that's like and the obligations you have to defend somebody that arguably you probably know did it, but they still have to be treated fairly in the system. So we'll probably bring some people on that. Case-wise,
I'm trying to reel you in on the one I've been trying to get you to do since we started.
I think we're
I'll
there.
not call it by name, but it's...
Well, I'll call it by name.
Okay, you call it by name.
Is the murder of Lynetta White.
Yes.
And
that's probably going to be one of my favorites for your credit, aside of Haley's.
Yeah, it's got a lot of detail in it, and it's just an incredible case. I don't want to go too much deeper than that, but I'm in communication right now with a relative, and to see what we can get as far as background on it. But it was a very complex case. That'll be a
that was yours, I might add.
Yeah, mine and the team.
And the team, yes. I mean,
but because what I'm planning on doing that one is that's where I'm thinking about inviting James or Leo, depends on where he's sitting, and Erica and Jonathan to come in and partake in interviews. And then there's a lot of other detectives, Joey Hess and Chris Schoonover was involved in that, and to bring them in on the phases that they were involved, because it was a lengthy investigation. We mentioned it a little bit when we did Catching Killers with America's Most Wanted, because that's how we got the suspects in custody. So that's one. Another unsolved, and that I'm speaking to family members on right now, and it'll depend upon how they feel about it, is when I started homicide in the 90s here in Lexington, the year I started, a good friend of mine that was in the Louisville Police Explorer program, then known as Joyce Clore, her name was Joyce Skis after she married, was murdered in Louisville. And that remains unsolved all these years later. And that was such a bizarre thing to be new to that work and then know that happened to somebody that you knew personally. Well, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around, there's the frustration on not being able to help, or could you help, and could anything be done? So we're looking at that. We're in contact with the police department that hired that now in the family to see if they want to go forward on that too. We have another case that we're working on. We love this serial offender aspect on that, and we've got another serial offender. We'll have Marcy Adkins back with the Kentucky State Police Crime Lab, that we're scheduling that one right now. We are working another one where I'm going to introduce a new detective that people haven't heard yet, Steve McCowan, that is still on the job on a case where they had a victim that was found in several states or several regions, and I'm not going to give any more. So we have tons of content coming. I think the content's going to get better. I think we will do more of the unsolveds and missings, which leads me to the last thing is, for the listeners out there, if you go to murderpolicepodcast.com and hit the contact form, reach out if there's cases you want us to consider. And if they fit the context and the format, we'll be glad to take a look. We don't cover everything. There's some things that go on that are better suited for other podcasts. I'll even help you get to one if it doesn't suit the context of what our listeners are looking for from us. But don't hesitate to let us know if there's something that you're interested in. We'd love to hear from you. Is there anything else that you're thinking?
No, not that I can come up with right now.
Good deal. Well, it's December. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Yes, Merry Christmas.
Please continue to listen. Don't forget that if you do buy things at the merch store at shop.murderpolicepodcast.com shop, or you can go to our murderpolicepodcast.com and get a link, you're supporting the DNA Doe Project. And tell your friends. Tell your friends.
You took my line. You know, you always read my mind.
Yeah.
I was going to say, and tell your friends about it.
Okay, well, you just did, so we're good. Take care. The Murder Police Podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims, so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police Podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about our presenters, and a link to the official Murder Police Podcast merch store, where you can purchase a huge variety of Murder Police Podcast swag. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed caption for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police Podcast and you will find us. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. Make sure you set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.